Well, welcome to Group 4, everyone. Thank you very much for your patience with our little manner in which we do our breakout groups here. I'm Jennifer Fink. I'm Park Planner and Project Administrator with the city. I've been here for about 6 years now, and I'm joined with Lindsay Frickle, who's the Executive Director of Issaquah Alps Trails Club. She's going to be taking notes today for us. And this meeting is being recorded,
we have
so yes.
Several discussions.
Hello, Sherry?
Okay, got it.
Let's see. Okay. So this meeting is being recorded so we can help develop our recommendations for the city and the community following the convening. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that we'll use the chat box to let me know if you have a comment or you would like to speak. I'm going to keep you all muted just because we do get a little bit of feedback for everybody. So this is a much smaller group, which should help us facilitate a really healthy conversation around this topic. I would encourage you to use video so we can all see each other's faces when speaking. And if you're calling in and unable to access the chat, you can also press *3 to raise your hand and I can unmute you. Let's see here. First, let's start with a quick round of introductions. I'll just quickly call on you and unmute you so you can chat. And I think we'll start. I'm going to just start at the top of my list. And Dan, it's in alphabetical order, so you're going to go first.
Okay, great. My name is Dan Hintz. I'm the Restoration Projects Manager with the Mountains of Sound Greenway Trust. So I've been working, really doing a lot of restoration work along Issaquah Creek with the Greenway for about 4.5 years. And I've also been an Issaquah resident for about 1.5 years now.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And Dani?
Hi, I'm Dani. I'm a student at Issaquah High School, and I'm really passionate about not only just creating more green habits, but also introducing that into the education system. So yeah.
Super. Well, thank you for joining us. And Dave Kapler?
Yes. Do you hear me? I don't see my picture on the screen.
I don't see you either, but I do hear you.
Okay, great. I'm David Kapler, long time with the Issaquah Alps Trails Club, and been working for over 40 years to get a lot of trees and open space saved. And I want to not see it all burned down, I guess.
Well, great. Thanks, Dave, for joining us. And next we have Lee. Oops, hang on here, Lee. Let me unmute you. There you go.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I can.
I was on the Rivers and Streams board for quite a while, and I've just been interested in sustainability generally for a long time.
Well, great. Well, thank you for joining today. And Lindsay.
Hi, everyone. Oh, whoops. I clicked on something there. I'm Lindsay Frickle. I'm the Executive Director for the Issaquah Alps Trails Club. I grew up in this area just down the street in Maple Valley, and so longtime resident of this area, and grew up enjoying the trails and the beautiful natural landscape we have here. And now I'm a resident of Issaquah and a mom of 2 little ones, 1.5-year-old girl Lillian and 3.5-year-old boy Teddy. And so we're very invested in our community here, and planning to raise these kiddos and send them to Issaquah public schools soon, hopefully when all this craziness is over. And so with the Issaquah Alps Trails Club, I've been leading the organization as their sole staff person part-time for the past 1.5 years, and working with the wonderful board to continue our great conservation work in the area. So it's nice to see all of your faces today. It's nice to have a little social outlet with this meeting. So I'm looking forward to participating, but I will be taking notes most of the time, so I might be a little quieter than other participants.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. And Mark.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Good. My name is Mark McPherson, and I am the director of a nonprofit organization that's based in Seattle but working nationally called City Forest Credits. And our work is targeted toward one thing only, which is how do we connect our urban forest with private sector funding as city budgets come under increasing stress. I mean, they've always been stressed, but with COVID, particularly so. So we've developed two pathways to connect urban forestry with dollars, essentially. One is through carbon credits. So now urban forests can earn carbon credits, and those credits are purchased by private sector buyers. And we've also developed an impact certification that allows us to score projects on their equity, their health, and their environmental impacts. And that's designed also to generate funding that is not a carbon credit, but is a company who wants to contribute to a community that they care about.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. And I know we'll be hearing a lot more from you here in a minute as we get into some of these questions. And Matthew.
Hello, I'm Matthew Axe. I'm with King Conservation District. I actually am the Wildfire and Forest Resiliency Coordinator. What I do is I help communities and small private landowners prepare for wildfire events and also look at their forests to improve their health and issues like that. And I look forward to seeing what you all have to say. And Lindsay, you have your hands full with a 1 and a 3-year-old, and God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. And Sherry.
Hi, I'm just a citizen out here. I fell in love with the area 5 years ago, and I moved down to First and Alder. I'm right in the center of Old Town. I'm a member of the Community Emergency Response Team. I've been hiking in the Alps for 10 years, and I'm a very concerned citizen about our carbon footprint, and so I'm here to support and be part of it. So.
Thank you, Sherry, for joining us. So we have 3 questions for this breakout group that are going to be somewhat facilitated. They were in the agenda. If you had them, I can also, if you would like, I can copy and paste it into the chat here. But our first question is for top, hang on here. Can't do 2 things at once as much as I think I can. First question is, what are the 3 to 4 most important types of things for the city, residents, and businesses to be doing in Issaquah to address climate change? It's kind of a big question, and so let's maybe stay at the 30,000 foot level without getting too deep into it, and maybe in our next breakout we can start digging into it a little bit more, because this is kind of a really large question. But if you just start throwing out some ideas as to what you think might be good as far as an organization to do, to address climate change, do businesses need a climate action plan? What other things could we do to reduce our carbon footprint, make people more aware? Open it up. Being we're such a small group, and I think we're all pretty savvy, I'm actually going to unmute everybody because everyone seems to have a quiet background, and we can just all if we're getting too much feedback, I'll mute you.
I might mute myself, Jen, just because I may not have a quiet background at all times.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Lindsay.
So I threw a bunch of ideas on the page. This is Sherry. And the top idea I threw on the top was make it fun and the in thing to do. So.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it's energy use, green energy, and I think that's at the business, the personal, and transportation levels, the city level. So I think that's huge. I think what Dani was mentioning earlier and Sherry, I mean, we have to find ways for the education and the engagement to stick with community members, with businesses. I think that's hugely important. And then something that personally and professionally I'm very committed to is, how do we better protect, conserve, enhance our, kind of high priority ecological areas. So that's, riparian buffers, wetlands, north facing slopes, all these areas that are going to be climate refuge in the next 100 years. And how do we be proactive about making sure we're protecting those, purchasing those lands, and doing the efforts to restore those habitats as well. So I'm sure I'm missing some on the list there, but really looking at those high priority habitats we have in the city and the surrounding lands.
And I kind of want to add something to what Dan said, and actually Dani both said. In my experience, I think where we really need to be working at is not necessarily the older citizens of your community. You actually need to be working with Dani and working on that education level, because if we can teach the next generation about our mistakes, that's the only way we're going to change.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that it's so much about like individual action. Like I know in my personal experience, when I started researching it more, I also kind of like got my parents into it, and we're like, here's what we can do to make sure that we have the least footprint possible. Even down to things like making sure we bring a bag to the grocery store and like using reusable water bottles and stuff like that.
The groups today that are kind of maybe the most important and are the dealing with buildings and transportation, which is the big users of energy, and making progress with that one. We have Issaquah is pretty much a model of saving forest and open space and protecting grounds, but we got to continue that and continue to be a model for other cities that also need to be doing that. But the other groups got really a big challenge with buildings, especially older buildings and older housing and commercial buildings, and then the transportation. Unfortunately, transportation here gets pretty limited because we got all these stupid forests and parks and all that stuff. And make things hard. And we're not going to see big new roads in Issaquah.
No.
Well, and to kind of build off of Dave's topic there, are there other sectors within Issaquah, mentioning building transportation, that you feel we should be focused on as far as trying to other businesses or industries that could really help move this, help us move the needle?
In my opinion, I don't live far from Issaquah, and I have friends that live there. I have family live there, and I've watched Issaquah grow exponentially over the last few years. And I think with the growth, we need to start holding these construction companies a little bit more accountable to what they need to do, and to actually ensure that we're putting back what we're taking. There's certain rules that are in effect that have to be enforced to ensure that we're maintaining our forest and we're managing our forest correctly. And that's only my personal opinion.
I would agree with that, Matthew. I'd say, I think this personal opinion, that the development in Issaquah is necessary. I don't want to, see as a person who rents in the city here, prices go up and, continue to see families and certain people priced out. So I think the development is something that personally, I'll say, not as a Greenway representative, just as an individual here, I fully support. But I think, are we truly, having those developers, cover the true cost of the environmental and climate impacts? So going back to the point that, yes, on the community level, I think education, engagement, trying to make it the cool thing is important. I think there's also the reality is that, we either need to have incentives to make that, something we follow, or we have to have policy and, laws and enforcement that hold, a little bit more accountability, because the policy is there for the most part, Matthew. It could always be a little stronger, a little more protective, but it's actually making sure it's followed through on, you're talking about mitigation projects that go on for 10 years. You're talking about monitoring that goes on for decades. And I'll be the first to admit, some of that stuff can fall through the cracks, and it's not necessarily out of bad intention. It's just, it's maybe not prioritized as much, collectively. So I do really look at the, whether that's incentives for private landowners and developers to make sure they're incorporating more climate consciousness in their work, or, if that's just stronger enforcement at the, city and county level too. But
I have a question about the Z Home project. Like, what would it take to do more of those kinds of projects? And maybe even getting into living buildings?
Yep, that's great. Great feedback there. Are there things that the city is doing well that we should do more of
Certainly
to
the,
address climate? Dave?
I think certainly the management of their lands needs improvement. We got too much ivy and we got too much holly and invasive plants, and the yellow we have all over town right now, especially not so much our town but all over King County from the tansy ragwort problem and those kinds of things. And earlier, of course, Scotch broom and these other invasives. But we got some good things. One thing that we could do in terms of the building issue is we've been very supportive on Tiger Mountain. Most of Tiger Mountain is not in a natural resource conservation area. Most of it is in forest land. And a lot of wood it gets left on the ground up there because it's not worth transporting to a mill to make something called cross-laminated timbers. In cross-laminated timbers, you can build 20-story buildings. And we need a mill closer to King County and our forest lands. So wood that's not usable, which is left in the ground, and carbon's left on the ground, admittedly, that's good. But that wood could then become used, and we wouldn't need as many trees cut down because we are using better use of the trees that we do cut down. So I know Forterra and other groups are pushing on that cross-laminated timber and trying to get some mills here. Rowley's using some in their new office building on I-90, basically for the ceiling of the top floor. But there's a whole bunch of steel that went into that building that could have been, if we had closed doors, could have been wood. Matthew, you shaking you know more about this than I do. So please.
I don't know more about it, but I've learned a little bit about the cross-timber timber. I know there's if I'm not mistaken, in Spokane, they just opened up a manufacturer for cross-cut timber and start building it. And they are actually, the science behind the wood products is actually very smart, and we have the market here. But what I was really shaking my head to is because of the invasive species issues that we all have to do. I don't care if you own property in King County, you have invasive species. It's just an issue we deal with. That being said, on the wildfire side of it, whenever you have invasive species like blackberry, Scotch broom, this increases the chance of your homes catching on fire because they are more flammable. And that's really what I was shaking my head to, David. And I think when it comes to Issaquah, I think they're doing a great job trying to do the fight. And I want to add that. I just think we need to really start looking at a large scale of it.
Yeah, I would echo that too. I'd say, I mean, my short-term understanding of working and living here, and also, talking to people like Dave that have, more of the history. I mean, the city's done a phenomenal job with land acquisition, especially around the creek, stuff like that. But I think, those lands aren't necessarily easy to maintain or cheap to maintain, and talking about invasive weeds, talking about actual forest restoration, and stuff that maybe we can get funding for a year or two through a grant or through some city funding. It's looking at maybe a little bit more broadly what the long-term needs are for land management, because the acquisition side has been phenomenal, and I think there's still a lot of potential to move that forward. But then what do we do with that land once we have it in city ownership?
Are there any other thoughts or comments on this topic? I'm just trying to manage our time. We can always come back to any one of these items for conversation. I just want to make sure we also allow enough time to get through the questions we need to. So yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
What I'm going to do is, I know Mark talked about private funding, and there's been talk about funding and everything. I'm actually putting a link in the chat box. It's something I just learned about yesterday from a few of my partners. It's large landscape scale restoration grants. So if it does help somebody, I'm gonna put it in here, and if it works, there you go.
Super, thank you for that.
Jennifer, I can offer a few thoughts.
Please join in, Mark.
Well, what's so striking to me is we're a small group of we have 8 or 12 people here, and already just in the first 20 minutes, there are all these incredible ideas. And that's wonderful. And you can feel the energy, you can feel, coming from all of us, all different places where we're sitting and where we come from in life and where we are now. So, but where I go with that is, okay, what do we do with all that? Because we've already, just the 8 or 12 of us, had a bunch of ideas on the table, and we're one of 4 breakout sessions, a relatively small climate convening that's in an entire city of Issaquah. So I guess I think, how do we organize not just ourselves, but all these different ideas? And so I'm thinking we're on the resiliency and sequestration group. So I think in terms of, well, what is resiliency? Sequestration we think of as carbon, so that's relatively straightforward. And we could talk about carbon and different ways to improve sequestration. Resiliency, though, I'm wondering if it doesn't make sense for all of us to just put out ideas on what that is. Does it include stormwater reductions to prevent flooding in more severe weather events? Does it include urban heat effects that are clearly going to get visited on our region? Does it include things like vulnerable populations or, equity? And if you have a list of some of those resiliency items, then the group can say, yeah, we like these, we don't like these are important, these aren't important. And then ultimately, I think somebody somewhere, and it's whether it's us or a larger group or a future strategic planning group or whatever, would have to say, how do we select which one of these to focus on? Where do we put our energies?
Yep.
Because I was hearing this, and so I pulled this out. My kids and I play Boggle. They're in their 20s, but when they come over and visit, can you see this hourglass? So I was thinking, it's kind of like we have all these ideas coming in at the top. And ideally, there'd be some way to organize those, channel them. You may route them through a smaller nozzle, but that also gives them more power, more pressure. And then that gets acted on in a larger thing at the bottom. So to take in line, I can't remember the name of the woman who's at Issaquah High, when she says it's very personal. Well, once it gets channeled and strategized and thought through with options selected, then it can get channeled out. So everybody can feel a part of the solution. So
Yeah.
those just kind of a framing thoughts, really.
No, and Mark, you're setting the stage for when we return back for our second group session, because that's really what we're going to start talking about. It's really honing in. It's what are some ideas to start that framework so we can begin to move this forward? Now, this section is just kind of the global general thing about climate change, but our next breakout, we're really going to start focusing in on the sequestration and the resiliency elements and how we can start putting out some parameters and identify some items that may be important for the community. So great ideas, and I love what's happening here because we're having the conversation that we should. Just real quick, when we're talking about addressing big, I'm going to introduce the second question here. When we're looking at the bigger, I'm going to post here, bigger climate items, how bold does Issaquah need to be in their actions to address climate change, and what trade-offs should be considered? Some of the options are business as usual, go with the flow, be ahead of the flow, be a regional leader. What do you think? What do you think some of those items should be? What's your thought on those?
Remind me how cities working with other cities.
We're part of
maybe bring forth some ideas to work with regionally.
Yeah, I'm not even up on everything as far as our Office of Sustainability, all the different groups that they are, but we are part of many King County and other regional groups and cities that get together and talk about some of these issues. But like many things, it gets talked about, but there hasn't been a lot of action. And so we're really wanting to see where Issaquah can start taking action. And, do we want to just go with the flow, or do we want to be ahead as a regional leader and start taking some bolder steps than maybe some of our other counterparts?
Well, I really like the bag ban, and then especially the restaurants having compostable utensils. You know, in the restaurants, when you go to eat, you can just dump your everything in the compost.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you know, that helps with climate change too, because there's less plastic. But those kind of things would be great to be pushing the boundary on.
Mm-hmm.
Being ahead.
I agree.
One of the things that I find weird, because first and foremost, to let you know, I grew up in Kentucky. I grew up on clearly the other side of the United States. And in my early teens and when I was starting to work, we actually had compost piles in the back of the restaurant food. And we would sell it to a local hog farm. And what they would do is they would use it. And I've not seen that out here. And I'm kind of curious why you all don't do it. You all, Issaquah specifically, is a lot more ecological concerns than where I'm from. It's about farming and how fast we turn them. Here, you all actually have the ecological concerns and have a piece of knowledge with it, and yet you're not doing something as simple as that. So I'd like to echo what Leigh is saying, you know.
Agreed. I'm going to read a little bit that Megan had asked us to read out, so please forgive me while I look at my other screen here for y'all. But we're all here because we care about climate change, and we think it's important to reduce greenhouse emissions. But there are factors that we need to consider. For example, 38% of our emissions are from transportation, and the average daily vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, is about 23 miles per person. To reduce transportation emissions by 50%, people would need to cut their daily VMT to 11 or 12 miles. Both Bellevue City Center and Microsoft in Redmond are about 11 or 12 miles just one way. We want to have more efficient building codes for new commercial multifamily that may have impact on economic development and the cost to build, or if we require efficiency in existing buildings, that may be increased burden or small operations to run their businesses here in Issaquah. So some of those things to think as we look at question number 2, how those all play into it. You know, how bold do we want to go?
Well, you don't need to reduce your miles traveled if you had renewable electricity and you had electric vehicles. So I think that's something that we need to aim for long term, right? We need to have more sustainable fueled vehicles. You don't want to hamper people from taking a vacation or, you know, whatever you need to do. So you need to be able to do those things in a sustainable way.
But that's one more car on the road still. So that takes resources to support.
Right.
I moved to Old Town Issaquah for a walkable lifestyle.
Yeah, you definitely want that too.
Yeah, and so what I think Issaquah is doing great is they're developing the connecting trails, the regional multi-use connecting trails, and that has I put myself on Metro Mile, and my car insurance is down 80%. You know, and I'm driving the car in that 5 mile a day range, you know, whatever it is. And the most efficient city one of the most efficient cities in the world is New York City, and it's one of the biggest cities in the world. It's because it's dense, they walk, and you know it's connected that way. So and their most common form of transportation is the elevator. So so that the dense city, even though some people don't like, oh my God, you're making it all dense, but it's the way to go. So to reduce that transportation, the cars, the space for the cars, and all the energies to support transportation. So
I just want to call out, I see our Mary Lou Polly has joined us. Hello, Mary Lou. Would you like to say quick something to the group and for sequestration and resiliency?
Thank you, Jen. Today I'm just sort of lurking around in the background of all of the different sessions. I'm not here to make comments or suggestions. I'm here to listen. And also just, I want to thank you. I think the work on this collaboration has brought together some amazing folks within our own community and with agencies who want to work on this. So Jen, go ahead and keep going. I'll be here for about 15 or 20 minutes. And thank you all for coming today and joining. It's awesome.
I'm glad you could join us, Mary Lou, or Miss Mayor. So back to the question, when we look at how bold does Issaquah need to be? What should we be?
I know the Central Issaquah plan is trying to get multi-use in. I think that's really important. It goes to the density question, but also having residents and businesses right there, maybe schools, other parks, everything you need within walking distance for your day-to-day stuff.
I also think Issaquah has a great opportunity and is positioned really well to become what they call a trail town. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of them. It's really using those multi-use trails, bicycles, hikers, to bring tourists in without bringing cars in. If they bring them in, they have an ice cream or they have, something from a local brewery to where they can really enjoy it. Now, imagine you've heard of them, haven't you, Sherry?
Wait, what'd you say? Would you describe it as?
The trail towns?
Trail town, yes. Trail town.
Yes, in my opinion, Issaquah could be a great example of one of those.
Yeah, we're almost there.
Okay.
I think Issaquah can be pretty tough because we are a very desirable place to live, and we can raise the standards pretty high and have in the past. And if we were the white centers of the world, in some places it's going to be a lot harder. But we could put a pretty high bar because people want to live. Our schools, our transportation, accessibility to lots of things, and of course the natural environment.
Yep.
We've had the high bars before. We wouldn't let them do it. Issaquah Highlands is a bunch of spread out rural type stuff, gobbling up lots of land. We put on 20% of the land that they own for development, 80% of mostly open space parks. Talus, much tighter development than developers at one point to cover the whole east side of Cougar Mountain with.
Very well said, Dave. Thank you. I just looked at our time, and we're going to have to soon join back to the main meeting group. But I did want to quick throw out question number 3 for the group. In what ways, as attendees, organizations, business, and the city, how can we collaborate to help address climate change challenge?
Well, I think we've been touching on some of that already.
I would agree, Lee.
I think Mark brought up a good point, is really creating, a group or a committee that brings all these elements together to where if one is doing it, aren't doing it. So you really don't have that overlapping, someone's doing the same thing, and you really focus your work.
Very good. Dan, were you going to say something?
Was I?
Uh-huh. You look like you were going to say something.
I've been thinking about it. It's processing. I guess it ties into the previous question. I mean, for me, the status quo is going with the flow of the region. And I guess for number 3 here, I mean, I think I would strongly encourage the city and folks here. I mean, look, whether Issaquah has the capacity or other cities or the county level has, more in certain areas, in terms of addressing climate change, I think there really is a lot of importance making sure we can be bold here, and I think we should be. That's my personal opinion, but I still think the conversation needs to be at a little bit more than just the city level too. So I think that regional connectivity is great. We need to push the flow as part of a collective effort in the county and Western Washington here. So.
Yep. Well, great.
Great comment, Dan.
Go ahead and post in a link for us to go back to the main meeting. Lindsay will do a quick report out of some of the ideas that we've shared today. And then after that, we'll come back to this breakout session. We'll do a little deeper dive into some of the topics Mark had introduced before and really start focusing in on the resiliency and sequestration topic. Okay. So here's the link for everyone. Thank you so much for your input, and we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes or so, okay?